ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be our next video on environmental science and going through part 3 of our identifying common birds in our area. Let's get started on this next video. Alright, so the first bird that we're going to go through and look at is the American goldfinch. American goldfinch is the state bird of New Jersey, Iowa, Washington, and is welcome and common at bird feeders. It's going to primarily go through and feed on sunflowers. Goldfinches often flock with pine siskins and common redpolls. Now if we look at the range here, we're going to see, like most birds, they breed up north. We're going to see them year-round, kind of in that middle region of the continental US, and then non-breeding is going to be further south. They're going to inhabit open woodlands, mostly consume seeds for food, nest along shrubbery, and be foliage gleaners. Now they're going to also be of low concern for conservation. Now some of the distinguishing features of the American goldfinch. Well, they're going to have these wing bars, they're going to have the black crown, but the most distinguishing feature is going to be their bright yellow body. And this bright yellow body doesn't always exist. During non-breeding season, we can see the males are going to look like this. They're still going to have kind of that yellow color to their face, but most of their plumage is going to be a little bit darker brown. Now the American goldfinch is going to sound like this. Now the next bird that we're going to go through and look at is the tufted titmouse. And tufted titmouse are little gray birds with an echoing voice. The tufted titmouse is common in eastern deciduous forests and a frequent visitor to feeders. The large black eyes, small round bill, and brushy crest gives these birds a quiet but eager expression that matches the way they flit through canopies, hang from twig ends, and drop into bird feeders. Now if we look at the range of this bird, we're going to see that it's mostly going to inhabit the east coast of the United States and most states east of the Mississippi. They're going to inhabit forests, they're mostly going to consume insects for food, and they're going to use cavities in trees to go through and nest. Now they're going to go through and be foliage gleaners, and they're also going to be of low concern for conservation. Now if we look for distinguishing characteristics of the tufted titmouse, well, it's going to be these features here. We're going to see that kind of gray-blue body. We're going to see this pointed crown, and we're also going to see this black eye ring. Now if we look, we also see this white underbelly with an orange tinge right under the primaries there. So if we look at this bird, we can see that it's going to look similar to that white-breasted nuthatch. The colors are very similar. However, when we go through and look at it, it does have that pointed crown, and that's going to be the tuft that we see along the crown of that bird. Now the tufted titmouse is going to look and sound like this. Alright, the next bird that we're going to go through and look at is the downy woodpecker. The downy woodpecker is going to inhabit forests. It's going to consume insects for food like most of the woodpecker species. It's going to nest in cavities along trees. It's going to be a bark forager, and this bird also has a low concern for conservation. Now, the downy woodpecker is a familiar sight at backyard feeders and in parks and woodlots, where it joins flocks of chickadees and nuthatches, barely outsizing them. An often acrobatic forager, this black and white woodpecker is at home on tiny branches or balancing on slender plant gals, sycamore seed balls, or suet feeders. Now, we're going to see the downy woodpecker basically take up most of the United States and most of Canada year-round, and we'll also see it in Alaska. And if we look at that range, again, it's not going to be one of these birds that's going to go through and migrate for breeding or migrate during the seasons. Now, if we look for distinguishing features of the downy woodpecker, well, some of those distinguishing features are going to be this. It's going to have a white underbelly, a black crown, a black eye line, and then we're also going to see these black and white speckled primaries here. One of the giveaways, though, is on the mantle here. We see this red region here on almost the back of the head of the bird there. That's going to give it away that it's a downy woodpecker, and also the size of the actual woodpecker. It's very, very small compared to many of the other woodpecker species. And the downy woodpecker is going to look and sound like this. Alright, so the next bird that we're going to go through and look at is the house finch. And this is a recent introduction from western into eastern North America and Hawaii, but has received a warmer reception than other arrivals like the European starling and house sparrow. That's partly due to the cheerful red head and breasts of males and to the bird's long twittering song, which can now be heard in most of the neighborhoods of the continent. And we can see that if we look at the range here, we can see that this takes up most of the United States and most of Mexico. Now, if we look at this, the house finch is mostly going to inhabit urban areas, and we're going to see that in towns. It's going to feed on seeds, it's going to nest along trees, and it's going to be a ground forager. It's also going to have a low concern for conservation. Now, if we look at some of the features of the house finch, these are going to be our distinguishing features. That bright red underbelly, we have a red crown and supercilium, we have a wing bar, and that's going to go through and distinguish our house finch. Now, the house finch is going to look and sound like this. Now, the last bird that we're going to go through and look at is the European starling. European starlings were first brought to North America by Shakespeare enthusiasts in the 19th century. European starlings are now among the continent's most numerous songbirds. They are stocky blackbirds with short tails, triangular wings, and long pointed bills. Though they're sometimes resented for their abundance and aggressiveness, they look like dazzling birds when you get up close. And we can see that the range again is going to take up almost all of the United States, and it's going to take up almost all of Canada here, stretching all the way up into Alaska. If we look down, we can see the non-breeding region is going to consist of parts of Mexico and the Caribbean, and the European starling is also going to inhabit towns. It's mostly going to eat insects for food, nest in cavities of trees, and it's also going to be a ground forager. It's going to have a low concern for conservation. Now, some distinguishing features of this European starling. Well, the first thing that we see is this very speckled body. We're also going to see this bright yellow beak, and we're also going to see these dark brown outlines along the feathers there. And sometimes this can be confused for the common grackle, But again, we see more of these speckles along this bird. They're both blackbird species, but we see more speckles of the European starling when we're going through and looking at them. And the European starling is going to sound like this. Alright, so did you guys learn? Well, did you learn a couple of things? Did you guys go through and learn distinguishing features for each bird? Did you guys go through and learn about the range and habitat of each bird? And did you guys go through and hear the bird calls? This is going to be the end of the video. I will see you all in class tomorrow.